If it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill. We know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your global pit stop for the latest news and headlines from the United States and around the world. I'm Eric Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. We'll get you a roundup of the day's top stories, but first, let's take a look at the headlines. No breakthrough yet in ceasefire talks between Hamas and mediators in Cairo. Hamas says the talks will be extended for a day. The aim is to halt fighting in time for the start of Ramadan. Ukraine claims its forces have destroyed a Russian military patrol boat near the Crimean Peninsula, adding to the string of attacks on Moscow's Black Sea Fleet. Former President Donald Trump's grip on the Republican nomination for president is all but certain as 16 states and one U.S. territory hold primary votes today on Super Tuesday. North Korea says Seoul and Washington would pay a dear price over large-scale military exercises, urging them to cease frantic war drills. And finally, Tesla halts production at its German factory after suspects allegedly set fire to high-voltage lines nearby, cutting power to the American car maker's only plant in Europe. We begin with the latest from the Middle East, where a United Nations team has found clear and convincing information that hostages held by Hamas in Gaza were sexually abused. A report submitted by United Nations Special Envoy on Sexual Violence and Conflict says that some women and children hostages had been subject to rape and sexualized torture. The report states that the team has reasonable grounds to believe such abuses were in fact taking place.
With regard to the hostages taken to Gaza, we found clear and convincing information that sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, has been committed against captives. And we also have reasonable grounds to believe that such violence may still be ongoing against those still held in captivity. I pause and must add that I am of the strong opinion that this finding does not in any way legitimize further violence, but actually reinforces the need for an urgent ceasefire.
Now, UN Special Envoy Pramila Patten also reported that the team had reasonable grounds to believe sexual assaults, including rape and gang rape, took place during the October 7 attacks by Hamas.
We also found that there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, occurred during the 7th of October attacks in at least 3 locations, namely the Nova Music Festival site and its surroundings, Road 232, and Kibbutz Reim. And in most of these incidents, victims were first subjected to rape and then killed, and at least 2 incidents relate to the rape of women's corpses.
The Special Envoy Patten led a 9-member team of experts to Israel and the West Bank last month, but the team cautioned there were limitations on what it could actually achieve. Chief among those limitations was a lack of access to survivors of these actual attacks. In fact, Patten said the team did not manage to meet any survivors of sexual violence during the October 7th attacks. However, they were able to talk to multiple witnesses, released hostages, and were able to review video footage and pictures. The report was finalized based on first-hand accounts of released hostages. Now, the report emerges amid soaring tensions over the handling of allegations of sexual assault by Hamas. And now Israel has accused the United Nations of taking too long to respond to these claims. And in a further stinging rebuke, Israel has recalled its ambassador from the United Nations. The UN, however, has defended itself against Israel's allegations.
This year, the UN and UN Women's silence in the face of Hamas sexual violence turned International Women's Day into a sick joke. This is the peak of the UN's hypocrisy. The UN claims to care about women. Yet, as we speak, right now, Israeli women are being raped and abused by Hamas terrorists. Where is the UN's voice? Where is your voice? Colleagues, I call on the Secretary General and the Security Council to convene immediately to finally condemn Hamas's heinous crimes. Hamas must face unrelenting pressure to end their sexual violence and release all of the hostages immediately.
Now, at the heart of this bitter dispute between Israel and the United Nations is also the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Several Western countries, including the United States, have pulled funding to the UNRWA after Israel accused nearly a dozen of its employees of involvement in the October 7th attack. The Israeli Defense Ministry further alleges that the UN aid agency in Gaza employed more than 450 military operatives from Hamas and other armed groups.
Over 450 UNRWA employees are military operatives in terror groups in Gaza. Over 450. This is no mere coincidence. This is systematic. There is no claiming we did not know. Hamas exploits humanitarian organizations and uses them to commit crimes against humanity. These terrorists are employed by UNRWA. They receive salaries that are paid by the international community. Donations that are meant for humanitarian purposes, meant to benefit the people of Gaza, are funding mass murderers and rapists.
UNRWA has been proven to be an instrumental part of Hamas's terror machine. Yet rather than take responsibility for the weaponization of this UN agency, senior UN officials have chosen to say that they had no knowledge of Hamas's hold on the agency.
Now, the head of the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency has warned of a deliberate and concerted campaign aimed at ending its operations in Gaza. The agency head has also called out Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for openly stating that the UNRWA will not be a part of a post-war Gaza.
The fate of the agency and the millions of people who depend on it hang in the balance. Excellencies, UNRWA is facing a deliberate and concerted campaign to undermine its operations and ultimately end them. More blatant is the Israeli Prime Minister openly stating that UNRWA will not be part of post-war Gaza. The implementation of this plan is already underway with the destruction of our infrastructure across Gaza Strip.
The Assembly cannot look away as Israel continues targeting UNRWA with attacks on its staff and premises, obstruction of its humanitarian aid, attempts to evict it from occupied East Jerusalem, and a defamation campaign that has thrown its financial situation into turmoil after a sudden suspension of funding by several major donors. That this is happening in the midst of the ongoing catastrophe in Gaza makes it even more harrowing.
Now, on Monday, the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency said members of its own staff had been detained, tortured, and sexually abused by Israel. It also claims that some of its staff had been forced to sign confessions related to the October 7th attack. The Israeli military called these claims unsubstantiated. It said that this was a cynical attempt to create false equivalency with the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war by Hamas. The UNRWA employs around 30,000 people in the occupied Palestinian territories, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria, with about 13,000 staff in the Gaza Strip. It's also been at the center of providing humanitarian relief in Gaza, where aid groups are warning of a looming famine after 5 months of war. And now from Hamas to the Houthis, as the Iran-backed group escalates attacks in the Red Sea, reports say submarine cables in the region have been severely damaged. According to a Hong Kong telecoms company, cables belonging to 4 major telecom networks have been cut. Now this has affected at least 25% of telecommunication traffic flowing through the Red Sea. It's also forced providers to reroute traffic between Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Now, experts say repairs are unlikely to take place for at least another month. These underwater cables are seen as an invisible force driving the internet in the region. In fact, many of them have been funded by tech giants such as Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta. Any damage to these networks can cause widespread internet outages as seen following the 2006 Taiwan earthquake. The destruction of underwater cables in the Red Sea comes weeks after Yemen's government warned of the possibility of Houthi rebels targeting these very networks. Now, Israel has blamed the Houthis for damage to the cables. However, the Iran-backed group has denied any and all allegations. The Houthis have instead blamed the United States and the UK militaries operating throughout the region. The Houthis have been relentlessly targeting shipping vessels in the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, and the Gulf of Aden. In the latest, the Iran-backed group claims to have attacked an Israeli ship in the Arabian Sea.
Triumphing over the oppressed Palestinian people and in retaliation for the American-British aggression against our country, the naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces carried out a targeting operation against an Israeli ship, MSC Sky, in the Arabian Sea with several suitable naval missiles, and the hit was accurate and direct. The targeting operation came only hours after carrying out a qualitative operation during which the missile force and the unmanned air force launched several ballistic missiles and drones at many enemy American warships in the Red Sea.
Now, the Houthis say their attacks are in solidarity with the people of Gaza. In retaliation for these attacks, the United States and the UK have been targeting Houthi infrastructure throughout Yemen. Now, however, despite more than a month and a half of U.S.-led strikes, the Houthis remain undeterred in their ongoing attacks. In fact, the Houthis insist their attacks will continue until Israel stops its combat operations in the Gaza Strip. Russian President Vladimir Putin has found another way to divide Europe, this time using tricks from his spy manual. Moscow has published an audio leak reported to be from a conference call of Germany's high-ranking military officials. The leaked audio is almost 40 minutes long and includes the German Air Force's top brass discussing sending weapons to Ukraine. The military officers are heard discussing the logistics needed for delivering the Taurus cruise missile to Kyiv. The Taurus missile is an air-launched cruise missile which is known for its precision and can hit targets up to 500 kilometers away. Germany's senior Air Force officers discussed how Ukraine could be best use the cruise missile against Russia. Some even suggested using up to 20 Taurus missiles to target the Kerch Bridge, which connects the Crimean Peninsula to Russia. The German officers even discussed providing coordinates of Russian infrastructure to Ukraine for carrying out these very attacks. However, their preparations have been cut short with the audio leak, which has left German Chancellor Olaf Scholz livid.
What has been reported there is a very serious matter, and therefore this will be investigated very carefully, very intensively, and very quickly. That's necessary.
Now, the audio leak has raised an alarm in Germany and NATO over the failure of European intelligence agencies. Russia has accused Germany of wargaming attacks on behalf of Ukraine and questioned if Chancellor Scholz is aware that the Air Force was planning such an attack.
We have recently witnessed the facts that have been revealed about the confrontation between German Chancellor Schulz and the Bundeswehr, about some cunning plans of the Bundeswehr, which became apparent due to the publication of this audio recording about how they are thoroughly preparing an attack on Crimea Bridge, on other objects including munitions warehouses, and mostly how at the same time they want to necessarily trick everyone so that suspicion falls not on them, but on the Americans and the British who are already there. This is a blatant self-exposure.
The leaked recording puts a spotlight on growing frustrations in the German military. In fact, just last week, Chancellor Scholz had already refused to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine, citing it could drag them into a direct conflict with Russia. Even the UK, which has intensified its lobbying on the Taurus missile, urging Germany to supply the long-range missiles to Kyiv. The German leader has now authorized a full investigation into the audio leak, calling it an attempt by Putin to divide Europe.
We are scrutinizing everything now that we have the findings of the German military counterintelligence service. Everything is being scrutinized and checked to see whether the wrong classification has been made here, the wrong platform used. Are the guidelines sufficient, the rules we have, or do we need to adapt them? And then we will quickly draw the appropriate conclusions.
Meanwhile, opposition leaders in Germany have called for Chancellor Scholz to step down, calling him the weakest link in Europe. In fact, just yesterday, Scholz reaffirmed his stance on not sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine. But it looks like now the cat is in fact out of the bag, and Germany's military's campaign has been foiled by Russia. For Vladimir Putin, it's mission accomplished. And moving from espionage concerns in Germany to legal intrigue in Washington, the U.S. Supreme Court has handed Donald Trump a major victory, overturning a Colorado court ruling that barred him from the state's primary ballot. The Supreme Court has said states cannot bar the former president from contesting in the primaries. Now, what does this mean for Trump and his presidential campaign? Our next report gets you all the details.
In a massive victory for Donald Trump amid his compounding legal woes, the U.S. Supreme Court has removed a potential hurdle from his presidential campaign as the former president eyes another run to the White House. The U.S. top court has slammed the door on Colorado's effort to remove Trump from its primary presidential ballot. Citing the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, the court ruled that only the Congress has the power to strike the former president from ballot. The court didn't opine on whether Trump engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. It didn't even discuss whether the attack on the U.S. Capitol by Trump supporters constituted an insurrection or not. And neither did it delve into whether presidents are specifically exempt from the 14th Amendment's insurrection language. The 14th Amendment bars office holders engaging in insurrection from holding the office. All that the court focused on was which authorities have the power to enforce the insurrection provision, which in this case, the court said was the Congress. So, with a closely divided Senate and a Republican-controlled House, the chances of Trump being ruled ineligible under the 14th Amendment are essentially nil.
Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking the Supreme Court for its unanimous decision today. It was a very important decision. We're very well crafted, and I think it will go a long way toward bringing our country together, which our country needs. And they worked long, they worked hard, and frankly, they worked very quickly on something that will be spoken about 100 years from now and 200 years from now. Extremely important. Essentially, you cannot take somebody out of a race because an opponent would like to have it that way. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's the leading candidate, whether it was the leading candidate or a candidate that was well down on the totem pole. You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well.
Last year, the Colorado top court found Trump engaged in an insurrection and ruled that he was ineligible to appear on the state's ballot. Now, the Supreme Court ruling sidesteps some of the biggest political landmines in the case. It also dismisses challenges for Trump in other states. Both Maine and Illinois also moved to take Trump off the ballot. After the ruling, Trump accused Biden of weaponizing and using prosecutors and judges against him.
I will say that President Biden, number one, stop weaponization. Fight your fight yourself. Don't use prosecutors and judges to go after your opponent, to try and damage your opponent so you can win an election. Our country is much bigger than that. The other thing I say to President Biden, close the borders now. This is not sustainable for our country. It's not sustainable for our cities. Our country is under siege.
Both Maine and Colorado, along with 14 other states, are voting in primaries in a marathon contest. And Trump's legal victory came just ahead of Super Tuesday, where the former president is expected to sweep and defeat his sole remaining but distant opponent, Nikki Haley, in every battleground.
And finally, the West African nation of Nigeria is on the brink of an economic meltdown. Rising inflation rates and skyrocketing prices of food have exacerbated the crisis. Basic necessities have become luxuries for people in Nigeria. Desperate to get food, residents in Nigeria's capital city of Abuja are breaking into government warehouses to steal food and grains. To contain the crisis, the Nigerian government has now beefed up security at its food warehouses. Here's our report.
Africa's largest economy is battling its worst ever crisis. With soaring inflation and skyrocketing food costs, Nigeria is on the brink of a meltdown. And the turmoil has been the most punishing for its people. There have been angry protests and nationwide strikes. But the plight of Nigeria's citizens is only deteriorating. A litre of petrol costs more than 3 times what it did just months ago. Wages have not been keeping up with the mounting cost of living. What's worse is that prices of food staples have more than doubled in the past year.
I cannot afford to buy petrol to power my generator to water the farm because of the high cost of petrol. Things are difficult in the country. Food is expensive as well as several other items. The price of gari and rice are high. With these high costs of goods, we cannot train our children in school or manage to buy any food.
Now desperate to fight starvation, many are turning to theft and looting. In Nigeria's capital city of Abuja, hundreds are forcing their way into warehouses and stealing food. Incidents of food theft and looting of warehouses are becoming a common sight in Nigeria. The authorities, overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis, are scrambling to maintain order. They're calling it a crime beyond hunger. The National Emergency Management Agency has vowed to fortify its facilities. The security measures around these food facilities have now been tightened. The government says it's determined to prevent further breaches of law and order. Experts believe the current situation is so dire that it might leave the future generations struggling to get food.
We are suffering in Nigeria. It was not like this before, and we want a change for good. There is real hunger in Nigeria. Children are hungry, adults are hungry, and there's just too much suffering.
Thousands are devoid of basic food products like meat, eggs, and milk. In the northern regions, desperation is reaching new heights every day, as people resort to consuming low-grade rice that's fit only for fish. Anthills are becoming treasure troves as people scavenge for stored grains. A testament to the dire circumstances gripping the nation. The origins of Nigeria's woes can be traced back to the policies enacted by its president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Since assuming office in May last year, his decisions have only exacerbated the nation's plight. He scrapped fuel subsidies, brought in currency controls, and this shot up petrol prices and plummeted Nigeria's currency naira against the US dollar. Inflation rates have been on a relentless climb in Nigeria. In December, it rose above 30%, the highest in 27 years. To be precise, Tinubu's policy changes unleashed a tidal wave of economic turmoil. However, the Nigerian president touts these measures as bold reforms aimed at reviving the economy. He says that by doing this, Nigeria has saved over 1 trillion naira, which is equivalent to over $1 billion US. He also asked citizens to be patient, as he says the reforms will take some time to take effect. Tinubu believes his policies will attract foreign investment, which will turn Nigeria's fate. But critics argue that the policy changes have only served to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The situation has only pushed the most vulnerable members of society into further despair.
That's our show for today. We thank you so much for tuning in once again. We look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow at the exact same time. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden. How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.